to stop the violence in what is predominantly black communities and inner cities across the United States, it's my belief that you have to change the culture. And the culture doesn't change at the street level. The culture changes at the institutional level, at the systemic level. What we're dealing with is institutions and systems that were not set up for the sustenance and preservation of the predominant population in those inner cities. Therefore, the institutions and systems are basically set up to exploit. So what you have is the results. We're getting the blowback, from what the system was created to do. So the system is basically functioning as it was designed, according to the design, because it was not established with the interests of preserving and sustaining the lives of the people that occupy these environments. We all understand, well, most of us who are old enough or who are studied enough know that redlining exists. It happened and it's still happening. Most inner cities, predominantly black communities, are what they call sacrifice zones, where real estate agencies and banks and businesses drew a red line around those communities and said, we're divesting. We're not going to invest anything into these communities for the sustenance and preservation of the people here. So there was no people development ever intended with the development of these or the underdevelopment of these environments. So that's what we're dealing with primarily. So what you get when people are living in such a state of poverty and deprivation, you get people at their wits' end. It's deliberate and intentionally manufactured hopelessness, and it's serving a purpose. It's serving several socioeconomic and political purposes, and it always has historically. When we look at how the inner city is set up and what happens there and why it happens, when you're destitute, there's not a lot of opportunity. You make opportunity for yourself. Things that that were once considered unseemly behavior to you may become viable options for some type of economic gain or just a sense of being able to experience something fanciful even. So it's a lot of destitution there, and it's created by a system that was set up to exploit these particular peoples and populations socioeconomically and politically. It's in the best socioeconomic interest of prison industries to have the situation play out the way it's playing out. I mean, let's go back a little bit. We came through 250 years, approximately 300 years of chattel enslavement in the United States. 300 years of unretributed, unreparated labor, which basically made the United States the country that it is today. And then from 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation, we went into another 100 years of struggling and fighting for basic human rights, let alone civil rights, let alone citizenship. Within that 100 years, it was 100 years of lynching. Lynching was like throwing a block party. It was like throwing a cookout. That's how frequently it occurred in the United States. Realistically, the black populations of the United States, the predominantly inner city populations of black people, the urban dwellers, have basically been able to move freely in this country for only approximately about 40, 45 years, roughly 50 years. We're almost that age. All of us are almost that age. We're all 40s or late 30s. You know what I mean? So black independence or ability to maneuver as a citizen in this country is not even as old as us. So how much advancement do you think can occur for a collective, for a total population of people who have been held back, repressed, suppressed, oppressed for all those years? So we're looking at a white power structure primarily that had a 500-year head start. And now they want to measure wealth gaps and education gaps and all these things that are not being put into the proper historical context when you're measuring it. They've created this destitution. So we're up to 1965, Civil Rights Acts. You know, black people in the United States suddenly become citizens and can theoretically move freely through the country. But we know that that's not what happened, because the Civil Rights Acts were signed in 1965, Martin Luther King was assassinated in 68, Malcolm X 65, and so on and so forth. Medgar Evers, they all were assassinated right after that. Then the Black Panther Party were ran down on right after that. So all the way up to 1975, we had the agents of repression going extremely hard to eradicate black movements for justice. So here we are at 1975. And then in 1975, we get this divestment and redlining situation. And we get white populations moving out of inner cities to undermine the Civil Rights Acts. You know, so we had this integration movement. Okay, we're going to do this integration thing so that the wealth can be distributed a little more equally. The bankers, politicians found loopholes in it. And they created completely new, self-sustaining communities outside of the inner cities that white people fled to. They call it white flight, suburban sprawl, or whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't, white people went out, they built all these new homes, new developments, all the businesses relocated out to these areas. The inner cities were redlined and left to die. They called them sacrifice zones. You can Google that. What is a sacrifice zone? In this type of paradigm, you have deprivation at an all-time high, and people are like, okay, well, when we look at it today, we look at these nice neighborhoods, these nice gated communities that you see predominantly white people living in these days, and a lot of people like, well, they work hard. If you work hard, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but that's not what happened. We know that's not what happened. There was a time when this exodus out of the inner city by white people was fueled by the government, by FHA loans that were white-only loans that subsidized the purchasing of houses for white people in the suburbs. And they couldn't get the loans if they wanted to remain in the inner cities. So the loans were only available to white people, and only white people who wanted to move out of the inner city, which was basically all the white people, So they left with the government assistance, welfare, basically. But today, what they created, they act as if they don't know how East New York became a ghetto. They act like they don't know how Trenton, New Jersey became a ghetto, how Camden, New Jersey became a ghetto. How so many areas in Chicago became ghettos. The projects, people talk about the projects and all that. The projects at one time was where you would want to stay. Why? Because projects were built by factories and companies to house their employees. That's why all projects are next to railroads and factories, so that the employees wouldn't have to go that far to get to work. And these low-income housing setups were subsidized by the government and the company in question for white people, for white employees. Black people could not get this low-income housing. We could not live in the projects at this time. It was a white-only thing. That being the case, when they withdrew all investment out of these inner cities, which correlated directly with the withdrawal of white people or the exodus of white people from the inner cities, they left everything to go, So then we had this real estate-based school funding, tax-based school funding, which basically depleted the municipal budgets for schools in the inner cities. So it was all designed. It was designed to do what it's doing. And then when you put these people in this trap, and the people are destitute and void of hope, immediately following that, you flood these communities with illicit drugs. You do it. Nobody in the community wakes up one day and say, hey, I got this connect in South America. I'm going to bring this cocaine in here. I got this connect for this heroin over in Afghanistan. I'm going to bring this heroin over here. That never happened. What happened was 1980s, CIA, Reagan Bush administration, clandestine war against the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, who were the revolutionary army opposing Somoza, who was the dictator at the time. Reagan Bush wanted to keep their guy in power because he was allowing them to exploit the manpower, wealth, and resources of Nicaragua. But the Sandinistas were exiling all of them and running them out of the country, rightfully. To fund that war, when Congress shut off funding for the war, Congress said the war was illegal. Therefore, we're going to shut it down. They shut down the war. So the Reagan-Bush administration had to find new funding. Once the funding was shut down, the funding pipeline was shut down. They couldn't use taxpayer money for it. So what did they do? They said, okay, we're going to fund it this way. They started moving boatloads and plane loads of cocaine into the United States and flooding the black communities of California in particular, first and foremost, in the 1980s, early 1980s, with this cocaine. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are all documented facts. The CIA admitted to it themselves in 1997. They came out and said, yes, we are complicit. We did bring the cocaine over here. We allowed it. We aided it. These were our guys. You know, Danilo Blandone, the guy that gave the cocaine to Freeway Rick Ross, was a CIA operative. And many of the other characters were working with the CIA, Department of Justice, and so on and so forth. These guys were criminals. But this is how the drugs got into the neighborhood. This is how the cocaine came in the neighborhood in abundance. So you deprive these people of opportunity, and then you create an underworld opportunity for these people to, and so now it becomes a viable option for sustaining and preserving your life in a lose-lose situation. You know, not only do you have people who are like, yo, I need this, I'm going to sell this and pay my rent. I'm going to sell this and get some groceries, you know what I mean? And I got to help my mom out. I need to do something, so I'm going to do this because this is bringing me affording me the ability to do it. Then on the other side of that coin, you have people who are destitute and hopeless to the point where they're like, yo, I need to self-medicate. So they become users. So now you have this economy, based on misery. And it exacerbates to the point where now you have the gangs that had already developed in the inner cities, especially in California, where we know the gangs in California began as counter organizations to aggressive white street gangs. The first gangs in California were the white street gangs, like the Spook Hunters. That was an actual gang in California, the Spook Hunters, who would beat black kids up. When they catch them walking home from school, walk through a neighborhood, walk to the store, walking from work, wherever they were at, they would beat black kids bloody. So black kids said, hey, we're not going to go for that anymore. And they started forming street organizations to defend against that. And those same street organizations started to grow. When this planned or contrived deprivation occurs, now these street gangs become the vessels through which or by which the drugs would be distributed throughout the communities and spread out to other states outside of California. When this happens, now you have street organizations vying for territory and position, one versus the other. And in this, the CIA again comes in with military-grade weapons. And this is how the inner cities first began to see military-grade weapons. I mean, when we were children, our parents had a firearm, an old 38 or an old double-barrel shotgun that was passed down from a grandfather, or a pump shotgun of some sort. But nothing in the semi-automatic and fully automatic arena until the CIA, the same CIA that was trafficking the cocaine, was also trafficking crates of weapons, military-grade weapons. So they were actually selling guns and cocaine to finance their war in Central America. And this is how you get the AK-47s in the community. This is how you get the SKs in the community. This is how you get the high-power assault rifles. That's how we got here. But when we have these conversations and discussions about how to fix it, we never deal with that history. You have to put it in that historical context in order to understand how you got here. In order to get out of a problem, you have to understand how you got into the problem in the first place. But none dare go there, you know? So we're where we are. And the only way to solve this issue is for the leaders in the black community on every level. Leaders of every institution in these black communities, whether it's the Board of Education, even the police forces. You know, you have black chiefs in some of these police forces and precincts around the country. You know, the black mayors, the black city councils, they've inherited sinking ships. You know, they've inherited a sinking ship. In fact, at this point, it's 2017. Any mayor that inherits office, that ship is at the bottom of the water. But if it's to be solved, the crisis is to be resolved or abated, all of those leaders of these institutions, all these black faces in these quote-unquote high places, they have to adopt a complete and total black nationalist worldview. In other words, their efforts and the mission statements of the institutions that they man have to function with the sustenance and preservation of black people first and foremost as their overall goal and mission statement. If that doesn't happen, we're going to stay here. We're going to stay in this space.